I want to introduce who's become a good friend to me in our organization, David Charles. You want to come up? David has spent his entire career in disaster relief, including 33 years handling insurance claims, representing both insurance companies and policyholders. He's worked every major disaster in the U.S. since 1977, from the Northridge quake, that was 94, to Hurricanes Andrew, Ike, and Katrina, to the World Trade Center. He's, like I said, he's in New Jersey working with a wonderful professor at the Truro Law Center, Ben Rajat, and I've been working with him as well. David has a wealth of information to share with you. I'm so grateful that the foundation gave us the support to allow us to bring him here. I'm so grateful that he's brave and drove up from the airport without a four-wheel drive. We got a truck because I've become a wimp after growing up in New York. But anyway, thank you so much, David, for sharing your expertise, and I hope you won't mind my occasional interruption.
Thanks, Amy, and it is a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be anywhere with United Policyholders. They truly are the gold standard of public advocacy. They're not trying to make money. They're not trying to steer anybody in any direction. They just have a kind and loving heart. And they come to places, they go running towards trouble when everybody else is running away from it. And I really admire that, and I respect that. And those are the kind of people that I like to work with. She mentioned that in my background, my hometown was wiped out in a flood in 1977. I had no idea about any of this industry. I came home from college to see what had happened, and I saw this wonderful community of disaster relief workers who moved into town to help people. And it changed my career path. I took it as a summer job, and then I never quit. So all I've ever done is disaster relief. I've never had a normal job. That's about as not normal as you could be working in disaster relief. And you guys have had a savage education in what this whole world is. I was just talking to this gentleman earlier, and he keeps referring to things that, why does this happen, why does that? You can't use common sense on these things. You throw your common sense out the window. The federal flood program is not even a normal insurance program by any means, and you've all found that out too. If you've had homeowners claims, you see how differently they're handled by the National Flood Program. That's my company, and most of what I do is commercial and larger buildings, but my roots were in flood insurance. The first 8 years of my career, all I worked was flood insurance claims, so I've done thousands of flood insurance claims. I didn't realize then that it was the hardest of the claims to work. Now I realize it. The other guys in the adjusting world were making a lot more money faster than me and working easier, but I was working flood claims, but I got a good education in it. What is a claims package? A claims package is what we call the set of documentation that you're going to turn in to prove your loss. Now, all of you probably have seen the proof of loss form, and on Superstorm Sandy, it was so big, not that the damage was more, but there were just more people involved in the New York, New Jersey area. So they waived the provision for having to turn in proof of loss for the first couple of months. So they wanted to make it easier for people to get money quickly. That was the good intentions of the bureaucrats, but it turned into a nightmare because people didn't understand what that form was and what its significance was. A lot of people hear proof of loss, and they think it's prove your loss. It's a specific form. If you've seen the form, you know how detailed it is and how difficult it is to fill it out. Now, a claims package is a detailed and comprehensive estimate of covered damages. You can't put things in there that aren't covered. If you have to elevate your house because of the new floodplain management, you don't get to put that in your estimate. You have to write your estimate back exactly the way that it was, even if it's a fantasy that you'll never do. They owe you to put it back exactly the way it was. So the ICC program could help you raise your house, move it, tear it down, those three things. That's a separate issue entirely. If you've got a contractor, a local contractor, helping you document your loss, and he's writing a big lump sum estimate, as almost every contractor would, unless they were well versed in insurance work, they're not going to separate it out room by room the way that you've seen the flood insurance adjusters do it. This is going to be tested in federal court after Sandy. It seems to me like a really terrible burden to put on people to get contractors in their local areas that aren't used to using these programs. Xactimate, SimSol, the different programs that they use. This gentleman and other contractors that I know use their traditional job costing. They know how much it costs to do something. They might count the boards of sheetrock, but they don't go room by room with the great detail that the flood program demands. You've got to have photos that show the loss. If you've got a causation issue, now causation is a very important word in the insurance world. what caused this. Is it a covered cause of loss? A covered peril? Flood is not a covered peril on your homeowner's policy. Homeowner's policy, everything on earth is covered unless they tell you it's not. It's the other way with flood insurance. Specific things are covered, and they have exclusions also. And the final thing is a signed and sworn proof of loss. National Flood, Amy mentioned this, a strictly enforced deadline. And I've never seen any other institution in the insurance world be so adamant about this. It's just cruel in some cases. Today on the plane, I kept bouncing in and out of Wi-Fi coverage coming out here, and I had a proof of loss that had to be FedExed today. We almost didn't make it. It would have been a devastating miss for these people in New Jersey. It must be sworn and reasonably complete. And the ones of you who have signed proofs of loss, you did it because the insurance adjuster gave those forms to you. What that is that's your demand, that's your agreement, and a sworn and signed statement that that's all you want. That's all you're entitled to, and that's all you're going to get unless you file another proof of loss. They didn't explain it to you that way. They said, if you want to get paid, this is what we're already agreeing to pay you. But if you don't file another proof of loss with what you think that you should be getting, you're not going to get it. And the deadline here was not extended as it was on Hurricane Sandy. It was they gave them a year, and then they extended it another 6 months. Partly because the political lobby up there was loud and vociferous, but they should have done it here. There's just too much to do in 60 days to document these losses, especially when you have a lot of structural damage. And you don't even know what kind of damage you got until you start taking things apart. You see the framing and the structure of the home. Many times you just don't know. So you've got to understand that you have to file a new proof of loss documenting your claim. And it has to be backed up by estimates, and if you really should be specific in going after what they said they weren't going to cover. If you have a denial letter, that's very important too. In the regular homeowners insurance world, if they're not going to pay for something, they're bound by law and the regulations of every state in which I've ever operated, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere. They have to deny something with very specific language. They say, I'm not going to pay for this because of page 3, section 4A. And they'll cite it with great specificity, and then that's called a partial denial or a denial. Now, that started the 1-year clock ticking. If they don't sue within that 1 year, they can't sue at all. And they don't tell you these things. A lot of little things like that they don't tell you. Now, a supplemental claim is what we're talking about today. And it's not going to extend the statute of limitations. You've got 1 year to sue after the proof of loss deadline, unless you had a denial before then. Then you've got 1 year to sue from the date of that denial. And God forbid if you have to sue, I hope that you don't. You'd like to think that reason will prevail and that you're going to be able to make a case.
David, I'm sorry, I want to interrupt and make sure people get this because it's important, and I like to repeat it. Okay, so if probably most of you had your adjuster worked with you to put the proof of loss in before December. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. So what David is saying is that you would, if you did need to bring a lawsuit, you would have a year from December to sue, last December, right? From the time you put it in, not the day of the loss. But if they had denied something earlier before you even put that proof of loss in, then you might have to file your suit earlier. But I guess the bottom line is we really want you to get this stuff sorted out before September, before the 1 year anniversary. It's best to figure this out.
Well, I couldn't agree more. In my practice, we prepare every single claim with the anticipation of a lawsuit. Almost none of them go to that, but if you don't preserve the evidence and build your case, you won't be able to go backwards and do it. Now, this is the proof of loss form. It's hard to read on here, but if you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like. And this is what you're going to have to fill out to accompany the estimate that you're going to turn in. And this is the replacement cost proof. Replacement cost coverage is getting your depreciation back. Now, the only types of structures that qualify for replacement cost are single-family dwellings that you live in 80% of the time in the year preceding the loss. And another restriction is you need to have 80% of the value of that house covered, or the maximum amount of insurance available purchased, which is $250,000 on residents. So multifamily dwellings aren't covered, businesses aren't covered, none of those types of buildings you're going to be able to get your depreciation back.
Now, this is solely for NFIP, right?
Solely NFIP, a flood program, yes, through NFIP. And this is the form which you claim the depreciation that you get back. And it's easier to tell you what you don't get back depreciation on than what you do. There are four major things: carpets, pads, appliances, awnings, and antennas are not recoverable. You're not going to get your depreciation back on carpets and pads, appliances, awnings, and antennas. Everything else, you get your depreciation back if you bought enough insurance and you meet the other requirements. The estimate, old school contractors' estimates, lump everything together. No separation, material list, labor's estimated by the crews, and no unit costs. Now, unit cost is the modern way of estimating that all insurance companies have gone to now, because it's more specific and it's easier for them to understand what you're paying for in a room. If you had this building, you would have every single room measured, diagrammed, and described, and you'd have base trim, sheetrock, in every room, how much is in there. That's how they decide whether you've overpaid or not. The typical way a contractor does it would never be that detailed. He would say, in fact, in the old days, they'd write, "I'll do your job for $24,850 on the back of the business card." And that'd be all the detail you got. And if you like the guy, you got the job. That doesn't happen much anymore. And that's probably a good thing that it doesn't, because it's good to see what the real prices are. But the language in the insurance industry is room by room measured, unit costs, individual line items, and a full explanation of why you're doing things. If you don't document what you want, you're not going to get it. And they don't go to a lot of trouble. The adjusters that you met out here, another conversation that I had prior to this, two different experiences. One person, a lady, had a great experience with her adjuster because the adjuster seemed to really care and really went the extra mile to look at everything. The other gentleman had the opposite reaction. I think it's more adjusting than it is anything else. The level of expertise and the heart of the adjuster, whether he's really there to look for damage. When I came up in the business, we were proud to find ways to tell you, I found something that you didn't even know you were covered for. That made me feel good. And all my peers were like that. That's the way we were trained. After Katrina, it started to change. They lost so much money in Katrina. And I have to be honest about this. There were consumer abuses. People were turning in large personal property lists of things that were just like a Christmas wish list. They couldn't be documented. You couldn't prove who had what. So there were abuses. The feds, in a typical knee-jerk reaction, said, all right, we're not going to have that anymore. You're going to have to really document this stuff. So they started demanding invoices and paid receipts. When your house is floated off and you don't have a receipt for anything, it was just a ridiculous idea, and it got worse. Now they find the adjusting companies, the independent adjusting firms who send adjusters out here to talk to you. If they do anything, paying something a little bit more than they think that they should, they'll be fined. The company will be fined, and the middle managers and the owners of these companies are crazy to keep that from happening. So where you used to get a large benefit of the doubt with no sanctions and fines, now you get a lot less because the adjusters are not going to take a chance on having to pay it themselves or suffer a fine. And that's the only part of the insurance world that I've ever seen anything like this. It's really one of the biggest problems.
Can you request a new adjuster?
You can, but you won't always get one. And going back to what Amy said, it is so valuable to keep a journal of every single time that you talk to them, place a phone call that they don't return. It may seem like a small thing. One at a time, it seems small. But after several months, when you see 10, 12, 14, 20 phone calls unreturned, repeated things like that, that's when you can write a letter to your congressman, which frankly I believe is one of the most effective things you could ever do. All your congressmen have an intern in there who takes these complaints and they send a letter back to the adjusting firm, and those go from the bottom of the stack to the top of the stack immediately. Immediately. You write a letter to any elected public official, especially a congressman, if they make an inquiry into the claim, you're going to get prompt and immediate attention. And they know that's under scrutiny now. Even if they didn't do anything wrong, they know, and it's the worst thing that can happen to an adjuster. The adjusters also, I was an adjuster on this side for a long time. It is a tough job. You show up and you're in a hotel that you're paying for the hotel. Nobody's paying for it. An independent is just that. It's like an independent trucker in a lot of ways. You pay all your own expenses. You don't get paid up front. And a lot of these guys take the low-hanging fruit. If they've got 100 claims, they're going to rush through it and get the easy stuff to write, and then they're going to leave the second wave of the really hard work, finding what's really tough to find in the damage, to the next wave of adjusters. And even that I could understand and live with if that next wave really did the job. But they don't. They don't. They're daily rate workers, and they don't have any incentive to do it. And I'm sure that you guys are experiencing this. The lack of cooperation when you go back and say, well, listen, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this. Your adjuster's long gone. He's gone back to wherever he was from. He's hard to contact, and there's no recourse. Another conversation we had earlier, all of the homeowners and regular private insurance carriers are subject to bad faith sanctions. They're regulated by the state's insurance commissions. That is not. I mean, there's nothing you can do to these guys. They can thumb their nose at you with impunity and not pay something and get away with it because there's no recourse. You can't sue them. You can't sue them for bad actions. You can any homeowners insurance, and that's why they don't get away with this kind of stuff. And these are the basic, the most common estimating programs that you'll see. Xactimate, SimSol, and IntegraClaim. Xactimate was bought out by a company called ISO. ISO is owned by the insurance companies. Who do you think that they're going to be favorable to? And it is, to me, it's a little bit of a collusive oligopoly. They're fixing prices. They're saying this is what it should cost. What it should cost is what you can get a contractor in your local area to do it for. The market tells you what it should cost. And the supply and demand curve goes way out of scale when you've got an event like this. And they all say, oh no, we survey, we do this, we do that. Every adjuster in the field knows that those prices are wrong, that they're going to go up, and they make their first payments based on whatever they know that they can get paid, get it through there, they go on home, and then you get sticker shock when you finally get a contractor out there after you might have gotten $50,000 and thought maybe that's a lot. And your contractor tells you it's $120,000, that's when you realize you really got nailed. And the adjuster's gone. So you're going to have to do a supplement. You have to prove why he's wrong. You shouldn't have to do that, but you do. Now, a line item estimate, that's the basic type of estimate that you do. A line item is one line of writing about one type of thing. Remove and replace sheetrock, 374 square feet, $1.50 a square foot equals this. That's a line item. A line item has a unit of measure, square foot in the case I just gave you, a quantity, 374 square feet, the scope, what it is they're doing, remove and replace, detach and reset, clean, that's the scope, the unit price, how much you're going to do it for that square foot relative to the unit of measure, and then depreciation. We're going to talk a little bit more about depreciation and how subjective it is. It's very subjective. There's not much of a guideline in the National Flood Program for depreciation, and I'll give you some examples on how it can vary drastically on the same exact items, depending on how they're used. Unit of measurement might be square yards for carpet, square feet for sheetrock. All different building materials have different units of measure. When you're looking at the estimates that they give you, this is the language they're using. EA for each is counted items, like 14 each, doors, things like that, cubic yards. The scope is two parts, the action and the material of the object involved. Remove and replace is the action, carpet is the material involved. That's the scope of that line item. Detach and reset is the action, ceiling fan is the object involved. Depreciation is based on the estimated useful life of an object or a building material. It's calculated as a percentage of the replacement cost of the item being depreciated. And repairs aren't depreciated. So if I repair something and I don't replace materials, if all I do was readjust or take something off and put it back on, it shouldn't be depreciated. And now, depreciation, the estimated useful life. So let's talk about a couch. We'll make it a $1,000 couch for an easy number to work with. If an elderly couple has a $1,000 couch, the same couch that a young couple with 5 kids have, who's this going to wear out more quickly? The young couple with 5 kids jumping up and down on it might last 4 or 5 years. The elderly couple might last 10 or 20 years. It's the same couch, the same value, it's how it's used, and that's very subjective. A lot of these adjusters are just making blanket statements, they're rushing through depreciation, and so it's arguable. All these things are arguable if you have an understanding of what is the useful life relative to its circumstances. You have to depreciate everything in the flood program. I've never seen a program that depreciated things like sheetrock and framing before. Flood does. I mean, the sheetrock doesn't really depreciate. It's going to be there for the life of the house unless something happens. The studs. These aren't things that you change like you do carpet, floor coverings, painting the walls, and wallpaper, appliances. So the rates of depreciation are different among all these different things. Example, well, interior walls every 10 years. If you do it every 10 years, the depreciation would be 10% a year. If you painted 3 years ago, your depreciation would be 30%. Not many adjusters go over 30 or 35% though. Most of them are not trying to kill you on depreciation. Some of them do it through ineptitude, not really knowing what they're doing. Some of them might have a mean spirit and act like it's their own money. Most of the adjusters are trying to help you, but they just don't know how, or they're inept, or haven't got the experience of others.
Excuse me, David. So how can a homeowner who's not in the construction business figure out whether the been overly depreciated?
Yeah, the way that you would do that is you'd look at any one line item, and generally speaking, they're probably going to depreciate paint the same in every room, unless they knew that you painted one room more recently than another. And that would take a really thorough exam by an adjuster to do it correctly that way. So if you see that the $1,000, again a round number, they depreciated it $300, they depreciated you 30%. So that's how you know how much they depreciated you. So from that you say, well, 30%, how did they get to that? Are they saying that 30% of the useful life of this is gone? That's the common sense that you'll have to apply to it. If you just painted last year, then 30% would be way too much. If you didn't paint for the last 15 years, you got a good break. So it can go both ways with them being lazy. So you don't want to complain out of hand. You have to look at each instance on its own merit. If that's how you tell what their depreciation is, look at any one line item and see what percentage of that line item was deducted for depreciation. That's the percentage that they're using to apply. And it should vary from every line item. It should be very minimal. Just to show depreciation, which I have to when I help someone with a floodplain, I show 0.5% a year for studs or sheetrock, and I never go over 10 or 20% on that, even if it's a 70-year-old house, because it's just ridiculous. And I can make the case that it's been here this long, there's nothing wrong with those studs that age caused. They're not going to change. Replacement cost value, depreciation, and actual cash value. This three-part formula is the basis of all insurance. Replacement cost value is the total cost required to replace an item. It's what a contractor would charge you. It's what you would pay at Best Buy if you're buying a television set. Replacement cost value has nothing else to do with depreciation, nothing. Depreciation is the useful life deducted from the replacement cost value. RCV, replacement cost value, less depreciation equals actual cash value. That's the basic formula of insurance and in every insurance. It's the formula that's also used in valuing your home. There are two types of values involved in your proof of loss. The top 4 lines of your proof of loss, when you get into the numbers, that's just talking about how much your home would be worth and your contents would be worth with no damage. They're trying to give a picture of what the value of that house was undamaged before all this happened. The bottom 5 lines are talking about damage only, but they're still using this 3-step formula. Replacement cost value is probably a square footage. If you have a 2,000 square foot home, it costs $200 a square foot to build. That's how they get that. Then they would deduct the depreciation based on how old it was. There's nothing to do with damage on the top part of this. I'm sorry?
A quick question. Replacement cost value, can sales tax and shipping be added to the purchase price of the item? And those 3 components together substantiate the replacement cost value, or just
No.
the purchase price, not the tax, not the shipping?
Whatever it took to get it to your house, sales tax and shipping, absolutely, if that's the way that you got it. And that's what you paid for. That goes to the basic principle of insurance, which is to indemnify, which is to put you back the way that you were. Putting you back the way that you were is whatever you had to spend to do it. Now, so replacement cost, you got to learn this formula. RCV, in the business, it's RCV, depreciation, ACV. Very important. The estimate, properly calculated line item will have all those items we talked about earlier. The quantity, unit measure, the scope, replacement cost value, depreciation, and actual cash value. Every line of the estimate has all those components going across in columns on a spreadsheet type. This is a valuation report. And again, back to there's two kinds of values that we're putting on things. We're putting the value of your home undamaged. That's the first top part of the proof of loss. This is the kind of report that you do. Actually, this is one page of 6 of the reports that I do when I'm valuing a home for the top part of the proof. It's a 6-page long thing that you do to get a square footage cost of what it costs to build your house. That goes towards co-insurance, where you've got 80% of the true value of the house insured. This is the type of estimate that you get. I hope you can see it. On the left is the room by room. On the right is a recap by categories or by trades. On the left, you'll see the description, the quantity, the unit cost, RCV, depreciation, and ACV, the things we were just talking about. And this is a very smart contractor I do a lot of work with, and he does a floor, wall, ceiling. He separates it out room by room, and we put a lot of notes in. You cannot under-describe something. There's a phrase in the adjusting world: you can get a ham sandwich paid for if you describe it correctly. You can get anything paid for if you know how to document the loss and say, this should be done because of that. If you're just rushing through it and making shorthand, the people who review these, they don't know what you're talking about, and they don't care. So document. Pictures, invoices, things like that prove your loss. And that's the basic line-by-line, line-item estimate. And this is from the same estimate, but as you see, all the things are categorized together in the same style that most contractors would write it. Although they wouldn't have all those categories, they'd have far fewer categories than that. But this program collects them, so it goes through in all the rooms. If you had 50 rooms that had carpet, it would pull all the carpet together and show you at once. And that's another place you can see what kind of depreciation they took. You can see the RCV, look at how much of it took in depreciation, giving you the ACV. That's what will tell you what percentage that they used. And you should, sometimes they don't give you this one on the right. That's called the recap by category. And it's not anything extra for them to do. They just push an extra button and it prints a different report. They're not having to calculate anything. That automatically comes out of the line-by-line estimate and Xactimate and SimSol. They all do this. It's very valuable. We use this a lot in arguing cases. Now, as if it isn't complicated enough, the amount of insurance required for a dwelling immediately before the loss can include footings, foundations, all these things. This is right now, this is the language in the policy. So when I'm trying to decide if you comply with the 80% rule so that you can get replacement cost, I have to back these things out of my square footage calculation. It's hard to do. It's hard for an experienced adjuster to know how to do this. This is right out of the policy language. The two types of depreciation that you're going to run into on a replacement cost policy are recoverable and non-recoverable. And that goes back to earlier talking about it's all recoverable if you comply, if you have the 80%, unless it's carpets, pads, appliances, and awnings and antennas. Recoverable, everything else.
Quick question.
Yes.
Can you be a little more specific about what would qualify as an appliance?
Yeah, I don't count HVAC as appliances. I don't count heating and ventilation. I don't count any of that as an appliance. I consider it refrigerators, washers, dryers, built-in dishwashers, things like that. But I don't count anything towards heating systems and cooling systems, ductwork, anything like that. And then again, this is also detached garages, I should point out. And another thing that's rarely ever comes into play, but any covered property that's abandoned and remains as debris, that rarely comes into play, but it is an issue. Yes?
So I have a question along the lines of detached garages. Many of us that live in the foothills have detached or outbuildings.
Right.
And it was a shock to me to find that my flood insurance didn't cover those, as well as FEMA assistance.
They
And
cover-
of course, my insurance company, because they don't cover flood. So is there anything out there that can cover outbuildings?
Not for the peril of flood unless you bought some kind of specialty policy. Flood covers detached garages unless they have some kind of a living component. If it's got a sink, if it's got an apartment over top of it, it won't be covered. It has to be a detached garage strictly for the purposes of storing a vehicle. So used to, they did cover appurtenant structures, a 10% extension, but now it's only detached garages. And this is a completed proof of loss. The top 4 lines, it's hard to read. line number one, $250,000, that's the full amount of insurance. Line number two is the actual cash value of the building. It has nothing to do with damage. It has to do with the valuation of what the building would be worth with no damage. The third line, I left blank because I didn't want to confuse it, that's contents. This is just talking about a building policy. But you could have the contents on there too. The fourth line is 2 plus 3. Then you get into the describing the loss, how much you're claiming. Line 5, full cost of repair or replacement. That's how much you're telling them a contractor would charge to fix the covered damage to your loss. That's the RCV. The next line is less applicable depreciation. RCV plus depreciation, ACV. 5 minus 6 gives you 7. Then you take the deductible out, and that gives you 8. So that's a 5-step formula. RCV minus depreciation, ACV minus deductible, net amount claimed. Now, out of that $1,972 in depreciation there, some of that is recoverable. The only thing that's not recoverable would be the appliances and the carpets and pads in this particular instance. So that's when you get into this proof of loss. This is the replacement cost proof. This is how you get that depreciation paid back to you. So, again, it's a slightly different version, but it is a proof of loss form. It's the replacement cost coverage proof of loss. And it shows again, now line 6 is the full replacement cost of the property. That's how much I say it's going to cost to build your house back, undamaged, before the storm hit. Then it tells, now line 7 is the full cost of the repair or replacement. That's how much damage you've got. The next line, applicable depreciation, that's 1972. Line 7 minus line 8 gives you line 9, actual cash value, less line 10, 1,000 for deductible, ACV claim. But now 12, that's how much of depreciation you get back. That's the recoverable depreciation. Yes, Amy?
Okay, so this form, we're looking at a sworn statement of proof of loss, and this is the form that folks would use to get back recoverable depreciation that the adjuster held back,
That's
correct?
exactly right.
Okay, where do they get a copy of this form?
They're supposed to supply it for you. The adjuster should give it to you. But and if he did his job correctly, he'd give you that right when he gave you the first proof of loss. If he didn't give you this, who's going to know to ask for this? Who's going to know that this even exists? You know. But it's the only way you're going to get your depreciation back is to fill out this form.
So
Yes.
it's on the NFIP website, and
It
we have
is.
links to them from our library.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, how can you file this if in our circumstance, we're knocking down a house and building a completely different house because we have to? So how are we ever going to file this? Because our depreciation, whatever we build is going to be entirely different. So
But you're
how-
still going to spend the money that they gave you. That's what it's all about.
So we just submit whatever.
Yes, once you've got invoices and estimates, paid invoices or receipts to show that you spent more than they gave you, then you can file this form.
And what about the 180 days? Because we still haven't gotten anything.
Yeah,
from the
sometimes they
county.
waive that, that goes storm to storm. I'm not sure if they've done that on this. That's, 180 days is not long enough for people to know.
It's been
You've
5
got-
months already, and
I know.
Boulder County won't let us knock down our house yet.
I know. And, you know, they waived this on Sandy, so they're not holding it back. Although some of the companies, even after they put out a bulletin to pay this, are still holding it back. So it varies from company to company, whether they're doing it. It's not as uniform as you'd like to think. Companies behave in a different way. Yes.
So what happens if the timeline just passes you by?
I would still turn this in before the deadline. I would submit this form.
But we have
We
nothing
don't-
to
we
submit
have
it
nothing.
against.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got a proof of loss that's already been filed, then part of that depreciation that they already agreed to pay you is recoverable. So that, I would file it to that degree.
So that if you get a copy of the original proof of loss, it should show what amount they held back.
Yes. And if
And you can fill this gentleman was asking, can I fill this out myself?
yes. Well, you can't, you may, but can you is another issue. Can you do it correctly? And that's not an insult. I mean, I know very experienced lawyers who just cringe when they see this stuff. I do an awful lot of work with lawyers in New York. None of them have a clue on this because they've never done it before. Yes.
Just to follow up on what this other woman said, we are in a position where we probably will not ever be able to rebuild on that
I
property.
know.
It's very likely that it will be floodway, and we're going for the FEMA buyback if we can get it, but while we're sitting here waiting, the people at the National Flood Insurance Program are saying, give us paid invoices from your contractor of the work that he did on your home. And I'm
I know.
like, he can't do any work on my home. I can't do anything with my home.
I know.
So isn't there some alternative to that?
I wish I could say yes, but I think it would vary from storm to storm, and every storm has its own personality. And this one has a distinct personality of its own, a lot of the instances that you just described. I don't have a good answer for you on that. I would file this every time and make them reject it, and then I would argue that you owe us replacement costs, we're not able to go back because of local restrictions. I don't know if you'll prevail or not, but I would certainly file the proof of loss. And just because they say that you have to have paid invoices, that doesn't mean that you won't be able to litigate it later. And again, I'm not an attorney, so I can't advise you in that regard. I would get my proof of loss turned in before the deadline every case. Don't let me out of that.
What deadline are you referring to? Just because we're reporting on a deadline.
Yeah, well, the deadline to file suit, which we hope you don't have to do, is 1 year. From a denial or from the proof of loss deadline, which was 2
How about
months.
that? Is there a deadline on the second referendum?
Actually, they'd like to say that it was, the deadline was the 60 days. But if you can show extra damages and prove it, then there's nothing written anywhere that they won't do that. So it's their option to consider it, but you have to prove it. You can't wait forever. So right now, what you should be doing is getting contractors' estimates to show exactly what you believe that you should be paid and file a proof of loss with that contractor's estimate. It's called an adverse proof of loss. It's one that you file, not they file. When they file it, they're telling you, this is what I'm willing to pay you. And inadvertently, you're signing these things, and what you're really doing, you're agreeing with them. This is all that I expect, this is all I ever want, I agree with you. But they don't tell you that. Unless you file another one, that's what you've done. You've sworn off on their numbers. And that's all you get. Beg your pardon? Yes, all I'm talking about now is national flood.
So David, I just want to make sure that you share what you have shared with us, which is that when you file the supplemental, you're gonna give an entire package.
Yes, you have to have the entire claims package, that's what we're talking about. And it's not just this form. This form means nothing if you don't have documentation to back it up. You've got to have photographs, you may need an engineering report if you've got a structural issue that you're at odds with them. I don't know, do any of you have earth movement denials here? That's the most heinous, evil thing I've ever seen. I just can't even imagine how they would try to say earth movement when you've got 4 feet of water in your house. We got thousands of them on Sandy, and it's the biggest scam I've ever seen in my life. It's awful. But you're going to have a structural engineer who rebut their structural engineer who just phoned it in. It's probably said settlement or something.
So we just got structural engineer supplemental, but they did a whole new proof of loss. Does that give us more time to submit an adverse proof of loss?
What they gave you another proof of loss?
Yeah, the full proof of loss, but this time they included the structural engineer that they hired.
Do you agree with their number?
We don't know, I don't know, it's,
Yeah.
they just randomly made up a number.
Well, they have to have an estimate to support it. They have to show you an estimate to go with that proof of loss. And you're going to have to show it to somebody who knows what they're looking at to decide whether you got a fair deal or not. So have you already gotten an engineer your own?
No, we just got this on Friday.
So was it a partial denial in which they said, we're not going to pay for this?
Yeah.
Well, a partial denial, and they probably based it on the earth movement exclusion. They probably said settlement or subsidence, something like that. And so you're going to have an engineering report that attacks what they said, or you're not going to win. It's dueling engineers on that level. And I don't want my engineer to go first. I want to see what they say so that I can attack with specificity what they said. Otherwise, it's like a poker game. You're showing them your hand. Demand an engineer if you've got anything structural at all. Have them come out. Give them a chance to be a good guy. Sometimes they are. But if they're not, then you've got something specific to attack rather than paying $5,000 to $10,000 on a broad brush engineering report that frankly could hurt your cause. A lot of the engineers don't understand there's certain trigger words that cause the earth movement exclusion. Subsidence, settlement. If they say settlement, you're dead. Settlement's not covered. That's one of the things they look at for exclusions. So this form, though, is not enough on its own. If you don't have supporting documentation to go with it, they're just going to say, nope, sorry, you didn't prove your case. Likewise, if you've got the best supporting documentation in the world that would prove it in any court of law, but you don't have this form, you're not going to win. You've got to have both. You've got to have complete documentation, and you've got to have the properly filled and timely
filed proof of loss. And that's a closer up look at how those figures. The top part of it there, this is the replacement cost here. Line 6, the full replacement cost, that's the value of the house. Value of the house, no damage. Line 7, how much it costs to fix all the damage. On going down to 1414, line 12, that's your recoverable depreciation. And that's how you get it back, is filing this form. Which is what we just described. The final form is the ICC proof of loss. ICC stands for Increased Cost of Compliance. It's a separate program entirely from National Flood. Now, a lot of contractors are going out there, say if you fall into the substantial damage category, when your community comes out and says you've got 50% of the value of your home damaged, they're going to make you raise your house to the flood level, the base flood elevation now. There's a big deal in Sandy, a very big deal. So some people want this, some people don't. If you've got the substantial damage designation from your community, you're eligible for an additional $30,000. But if you've already capped out your $250,000, the maximum available, you're not going to get any more. You'll never collect more than $250,000 between the two. So if you've collected $240,000 under the flood policy, you're only going to get another $10,000 on the ICC possible. Yes.
So, well, we have two dwelling on the property, we're both coming with estimates over 50%. But they came in at like 56 and 58. Is there any benefit to be gained in just trying to get that number from 56 to 75, or where we think it really
None.
ought to be?
It has, the only thing that substantial damage award does for you is get you into the ICC program. So, and they're really not qualified to say how much of your house is damaged. A lot of the communities are hoping to help people to get extra money to raise their houses. But I've seen a lot of them weren't really 50% and they got it anyway. So they're not qualified to say, based on an insurance perspective, and it won't make any difference other than to get you the paperwork that you need to get into the ICC program. So arguing with that will make no difference at all. If you're over 50, that's all you need. So I wouldn't argue with them, because it may go the other way if they look at it too closely. And this is the increased cost of compliance proof of loss. 3 basic proof of loss forms. The ACV proof of loss, the first one, the RCC, recoverable depreciation proof of loss, increased cost of compliance. And the full amount of insurance available here on line 1 is $30,000. Again, the same claim we're looking at. $250,000 or $75,000 is the value of the house undamaged. The actual cash value, again, different numbers off the valuation. Again, nothing to do with damage. The full cost of compliance, the $45,000 there, represents what a contractor would charge to raise this house. That's a separate bid that cannot show up in the main part of your claim. Totally separate coverage, totally separate issue. So many contractors are writing estimates to put the houses back the way that they're really going to be put back. It doesn't work. You have to write 2 estimates. You have to have an estimate to put it back exactly the way that it was, even if it's a fantasy that will never happen, because that's all you're going to get paid on in the flood program. And you have to have another estimate that says this much to raise it. And that's the part that applies here, $45,000 here. And even though it costs $45,000 to raise it, the 6th line, all you're going to get is $30,000, because that's all that's available under this coverage.